Good day, everyone. I'm Amy Lambert, EA's Director of Communications, and welcome to this, the latest in our series of webinars as part of our 50th anniversary celebration. Jen, next slide. EA was founded in 1973 by Dr. Lauren Jensen as ecological analysts. The company grew from a small office in Baltimore to a geographic footprint spanning the U.S. and its territories. Along the way, we became 100% employee-owned public benefit corporation with the core purpose of improving the quality of the environment in which we live, one project at a time. We provide a wide range of interdisciplinary environmental services to public and private sector clients, including solutions for remediation, climate change, natural resources, infrastructure, engineering compliance, and laboratory analyses. And next slide, Jen. Before we begin, I'd like to go through a few housekeeping items. Microphones have been muted and video disabled for attendees to ask questions. Please use the chat feature, which looks like a bubble with some lines in it. We'll be holding questions until the end of the webinar and answer as many as time allows. This presentation is being recorded, and we plan to post the video to our YouTube and website within the next few days. At the end of the presentation, before we go into Q&A, I'll describe the next steps for those of you who are seeking documentation of a professional development hour. PDHs are only available to participants of this live session. Okay, next slide, Jen. All right, so I'd like to introduce today's speakers. Sorry. I'd like to introduce today's speakers. Jennifer Peterson is Director of Solutions Implementation for Environmental Health and Safety and a Product Manager for EA's Environmental Compliance SaaS software solution, Seamless. Brian Lazinski is a Senior Vice President and EA's Director of both EHSS Management and Assurance and Corporate Social Responsibility. Kara Schwartz is an environmental scientist and project manager who works with clients to achieve environmental compliance and develop and implement customized environmental management system solutions. Now I'd like to turn it over to Jennifer, who's going to start our session focused on leveling up your EHSS and ESG programs by implementing a new or optimizing your existing environmental management information system. Jen?
Thanks, Amy. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for carving out some time to be with us today. With the growth and change of regulatory requirements, pressures to implement best practices regardless of what the law requires, and societal demands, we will continue to have the need to collect and report more data over time. That data needs to be consumed and shared in an efficient, digestible way to reduce risk, maintain compliance, and provide sustainable practices within our organization. Implementing an environmental management information system is critical to this process. Today, we will discuss the regulatory landscape, industry trends, why do we need an EMIS, and how do we decide on an EMIS and best practices to consider when implementing one. So let's talk about EMIS evolution. So as I mentioned, EMIS stands for Environmental Management Information System. It is a software that allows organizations to collect, store, analyze, and report data in a streamlined manner. One EMIS type solution is environmental health and safety software, which has evolved over time to address the growing needs of organizations to effectively manage their data and mitigate risks. At the beginning, before 1980, there was a lot of manual data entry, collection, and input with the start of using computers. Several organizations today still do a lot of manual data entry. In the early development phase, environmental regulations became more stringent, and therefore the focus was on environmental data management and reporting only with typically standalone desktop solutions where you couldn't share the information with others. Then from about the 2000s to 2010 came the integration and expansion era with incorporating health and safety functional components. This allowed organizations to address broader range of risk and compliance needs, and also began the adoption of web-based platforms, which allowed for better collaboration and data sharing with others. Next, we entered the mobile and cloud phase, which increased use of mobile data devices and cloud platforms. which allowed EMIS Solutions flexibility to share data and grow with the organization over time. And now we are in the predictive analytics and automation phase where we're taking the EMIS Solutions to another level with adopting use of machine learning and artificial intelligence to automate routine data collections and provide more predictive insights. As we go through the presentation, we will also highlight some of EA's experience with various EMIS software types, including a customized solution, SaaS solution, and a low-code platform. I'd like to now turn it over to Brian, who will walk us through the regulatory landscape, trends, and needs in the EHS and ESG space. Brian?
Thanks, Jennifer, and a good morning or a good afternoon to you, depending on where you are today. So there's no question that we live in a dynamic world of changing regulations and requirements. I mean, this is a good place to start the conversation. Most of the current U.S. environmental statutes and laws on the books were passed in a time frame in the late 1960s and have evolved through the years through the early 80s. Since that time, a lot of these laws and regulations have been modified through rulemaking processes and certainly ebbed and flowed in relation to political forces as well. But at the federal level alone, we've experienced close to a 40% fold increase in legislative rules and regulations since the 60s. If you look at the inset box on the slide there, the Code of Federal Regulations, or CFR, 40 CFR alone has over 270,000 pages of regulations on the books right now and over 130 plus laws. So it's a daunting amount of information. Additionally, we multiply that with state and municipal laws and regulations, which further complicate the interrelationships and risks of operations. Now, outside of these laws and regulations, we've seen an unprecedented growth in the past decade in voluntary and sector-based requirements. And good examples of this could be executive orders or voluntary codes and initiatives coming from industry. A great example of this would be the recent growth in environment, social, and governance, or ESG commitments being driven principally by the financial marketplaces, which are been codified into some proposed rules with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. And this will have a long-reaching effect on publicly traded companies in the U.S., requiring them to annually disclose information on assessment and measurement of greenhouse gases. So in response to these, if we look back at the slides, organizations are seeking to reduce their impact, manage the risk, and increase their transparency and accountability based on all these requirements. The market drivers and trends I'm going to talk about on the next slide are really focusing on more and more data to track, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But the integration of all this compliance and reporting data into the overall strategy by any organization is a far-reaching and important aspect, and viewed as a very, very important piece of any leadership or chief executive moving forward. It's maximizing the efficiencies of that management flow and creating more value is super important. We don't expect this to stop, so this trend will continue. We can jump to the next slide, please. So if we talk about EMIS industry trends, we can start off with the mobile first strategy, and this is kind of a no-brainer from the standpoint of life on our planet is becoming increasingly mobile. We know that through day-to-day activities. It's everything from the way we communicate and learn, the way we do business. We've come to rely on our smartphones and digital technologies for everything from our personal finances, well-being, as well as an enabler for business activities. And there's a great inset photograph there of an environmental technician doing just that, using a mobile-first strategy with an application in the field of data collection, which we do on our handhelds now through these mobile applications. If you look at the data point there from the venerable Gartner, over 1.3 billion mobile phones were shipped in 2023. And this is really a great indication of this shift to a mobile-first strategy, which is really a product of an individual named Luke Robleski who was a project director at Google back in 2009. And really, this is a business approach of shifting from a mobile platform first versus a desktop-driven platform. So this has really become the major trend that we've seen from an EMIS industry trend. The other point that I wanted to make here on EMIS industry trends is the double transition. This is a more recent conversation that's being driven out of the duality of the ESG commitments and the ongoing intersection of the growth of digital transformations. So many have referred to this in the industry as this double transition that we're going through right now, not only responding to ESG commitments and activities, but also that doubling and tripling of technology enablers and things that we're growing through there. Another industry trend is through this ESG focus is an increased focus on stakeholder demands, these ESG metrics, and really driving transparency and brand recognition from our clients. These are the things that are really important to them. And then another major industry trend is a lot of our traditional EH&S resources, a lot of our clients are taking on these additional commitments in terms of technology implementation. Jen's going to talk about that a little bit later about the implementation process, but this has been a pretty big shift for a lot of our clients, where they're not only managing their compliance responsibilities, but also the implementation of software. And again, you can see some numbers there from Verdantix about how this bottom line investment in EMIS will continue into the future. Next slide, please. I'm going to wrap up here with kind of a launch point into more detailed discussions about where we're headed in the future. And what you can see here is that we clearly know that EH&S and ESG programs rely on a lot of data. The data comes from different sources through mobile first strategies and other drivers. There's a need to have that connectivity. The programs nowadays need to have technology to succeed. There's no question. Utilizing this technology allows us and our clients to analyze data quickly and accurately. And Kara, who is going to follow me in a minute or two, is going to talk about some of the compliance points where time-consuming manual reproduction of data can increase human error. So the final thought I'll leave you with here is, what's the risk of getting your technology implementation wrong? So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Kara Schwartz and introduce her. Kara is a project manager and EH&S management expert here at EA who works collaboratively with EA teams and clients in the technology space to imagine and deliver scalable solutions. So let me turn it over to Kara now.
Thanks so much, Brian. Appreciate it. So after spending over 10 years working in the environmental compliance consulting realm and performing environmental compliance audits during that time, I've seen some common compliance challenges along the way, as have many of my coworkers, that organizations continue to face. I'm sure many of you can relate to a few of these that are presented here on the slide. And while there are many more I could focus on or dive into, I'm going to just highlight 3 common ones on this slide today. The first challenge that we see a lot is that organizations can struggle with staff turnover, where there can be a loss of institutional knowledge that comes with that turnover. Generally, if an organization does not have a centralized solution in place and established workflows to track that environmental compliance information, it can be really hard to onboard new staff or pick up where the last person left off. The second compliance challenge we see a lot, Brian mentioned this briefly already, is that if a team is using primarily manual reminders, perhaps even linked to personal email accounts or something like that, there can be often can be cases where tasks are forgotten or maybe not completed in time. There can just be too many obligations to track manually. So a routine reminder system for a team to stay in compliance can be a really valuable tool here. And a final challenge I'll highlight today is that a lot of organizations are managing multiple facilities and locations. So all of these facilities and locations can have varying requirements, varying stakeholder requirements too. So there's really a need here for a commonly shared platform that's easy to use to share real-time data with folks throughout all levels of the organization. Next slide, please. All right, thanks. So there can be many benefits to implementing an EMIS. By adopting an environmental management information system, many of those paper-based manual tracking or reporting issues and challenges that I just touched on can be eliminated. And some of the common benefits realized by adopting an EMIS solution can be automation. So an EMIS provides automation for example, by using a mobile data collection module or application. This can at the onset allow for streamlined, improved data collection and sharing in real time. And EMIS can also provide validation capabilities that can help reduce human error through data validation in real time within the system. Then EMIS can also help mitigate risk and also the unknown, and by just providing a centralized solution to follow standardized workflow and to minimize risks throughout the organization. And finally, an EMIS can help an organization navigate change. Generally, an EMIS is scalable, so it can really allow for growth and changes within the organization over time as well. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to introduce two EMIS projects that EA has developed and implemented using different software types. One of the first EMIS types I will discuss is a fully customized EMIS solution. With this solution, generally this is built from the ground up. You can get a software solution that you want, and this can be customized to meet organizational needs. Jen will talk more about the specifics of a customized solution with pros and cons in the next couple of slides. But for this case study, this EMIS was developed for a state DOT client. Some of the environmental drivers here were that this organization had many multimedia environmental compliance programs to manage within distinct branches of the organization. Here, this was a large team, so many facilities, over 300. And for this specific client, one of the main drivers were several regulatory violations too that resulted in a consent decree where they needed to implement a solution to improve their overall tracking and reporting of their environmental compliance programs and needs. This client specifically desired to create their own specific forms in an EMIS. Also, they desired the EMIS to be customized specifically to their workflows and were not drawn to an off-the-shelf solution here. They had the funding to support and provide for this EMIS over time. So some of the requirements that were distilled down included a centralized management system for multimedia environmental compliance programs across distinct entities, need for consistent and efficient data management across a very large team, and this data needed to be accessed by folks at all levels of the organization, from top management down to the folks performing the inspections themselves, and also by a robust team of contractors at this organization as well. Also, this client desired integration of existing software platforms that they were already using, such as their GIS platform. So the end solution here was a customized web-based solution that was built completely from the ground up specifically for this client. This was an EA custom-built web solution for this client, and enhancements have been made over time at the request of the client and just to upkeep a custom solution such as this one. Next slide, please. Another EMIS solution type that we will discuss is an off-the-shelf software as a service or SaaS solution. This type of software solution can be more affordable as it's less customizable. It's not built from the ground up. It's built from a set of modules or areas that have already been developed for this solution. This system also requires less technical support over time. So there are many pros and cons to each type. And as I mentioned, Jen will touch on some of these on the next slide as well. So this implementation that EA conducted here for this case study was a county government client, but in this case, the county had less unique tracking and reporting needs. The client also had less funding, and they were drawn to an off-the-shelf SaaS cloud-based solution. So some of the environmental drivers was that this client was managing several environmental compliance programs, multimedia environmental compliance programs to comply with many permits and many inspections that they were required to complete to meet their regulatory guidelines. Now, another distinct driver was that they had a pretty lean team. They only had a few folks that were responsible for environmental compliance across the whole organization. So this led to generally a lot of the requirements being managed manually on the front end before an EMIS was implemented for them. This led to distill down the requirements. They similarly needed a centralized, reliable system to track, manage, and report information. That led to consistency and efficiency in data collection. They were also searching for a more affordable solution here, though, where existing modules were appealing to them and met their needs, but they also desired that this system, which makes sense, was configurable to their organization so that their facilities are entered into their solution and that the solution mimics their organizational structure here. They were also very drawn to the mobile application to complete inspections directly in the field via tablet or mobile phone. So that was one of their big requirements here. So ultimately, the solution that EA implemented was EA's software as a service compliance portal, Seamless, in conjunction with Earthsoft's Equus platform to meet very specific environmental data management needs for this client. So it's important here to consider that there are different software types out there when evaluating what type of business needs, budget, and solution you may you may need at your organization. I would now like to turn it over to Jennifer, who will walk us through the last EMIS software type and then discuss the needs assessment and decision process for selecting an EMIS solution and much more. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Kara. Let's dive a little bit deeper into the different software types and some pros and cons. So the EMIS, the EHS EMIS software market is diverse, offering a range of solutions to meet the client's needs. Deciding on the software type really depends on your business and functional needs, what your budget is, your desired implementation timeline, and long-term growth potential. So Kara gave a great example of a custom solution that EA has worked on for many years now. This gave the client full control over what was developed and how the solution was hosted. A con can be at times that this is more costly to build because you are building a customized solution from scratch. So there's a lot of coding to maintain and update, which can be time consuming over time. But then again, this also gives the customer exactly what they want. Perhaps they don't have things that they have things that are very unique to their organization. Another example of a solution type is a off-the-shelf SaaS cloud solution. This is where IT doesn't need to really support or maintain the software solution. It's hosted and maintained by the vendor. For small to mid-market based SaaS solution, this can be a really cost-effective solution with a lower cost of ownership over time. The modules exist with features and functions that can be configured to the client's needs. However, some enterprise SaaS solutions that are pure software companies can be too feature-rich and overkill for some clients where you can't configure those components that are not needed. So that can lead to making it harder to use and adopt over time. And with those similar organizations, they may not also have the subject matter expertise to support and understand your business operations. Another software solution type I'd like to discuss is the low-code configurable platform. This also can provide a lower cost of ownership over time. The configuration and development can be done by a non-developer, so that's really enticing. You can have some of your staff using the drag and drop components and configurable settings to develop a solution. If you're going with a pure IT type firm to develop this for you, you'll likely not have the EHS, ESG experts to help understand your business operations, and it may take more time to develop this over time. With that, it's also not suitable for larger data sets and may need replacement for a more robust EHS compliance tool. At EA, we have experience with all of these software types. Kara covered an example of the custom solution and the SaaS solution, and let me just briefly cover an example of a low-code platform. So for this project, this was with the Class 1 railroad. The client wanted to minimize the total investment of ownership. They also wanted to leverage existing technologies that they already use in-house and that they have licensing for. So they wanted to, just like many organizations today still have a lot of paper and Excel-based processes, and they wanted to minimize or reduce the duplicate data entry and processing and make things more efficient for them. So they wanted a centralized solution with more timely and accurate reporting. And so the low-code solution was the best option for them. We built this based on using Power Apps, Power BI, and Power Automate to build the database, workflows, reports, and other components. So now that we understand what an EMIS is and how we can benefit from it, we also reviewed some EMIS solution types and project examples. How do you decide on an EMIS software solution that's right for your organization? So where do you start? So I recommend doing your own due diligence first. So try to put some of the puzzle pieces together initially. Do some research, conduct some internal planning and scoping discussions. Perhaps there are other organizations that you can also benchmark with or leverage that have gone through this process already so you don't reinvent the wheel. Define your business problem and business goals. What are you trying to solve and what do you hope the business gains from it? Determine the current stakeholders to engage. What is their stake in this EMIS solution and include them. Make sure that they're included upfront and throughout the process. Consider the different solution types that we just covered. Establish a budget range and timeline. Also, what I see is customers often thinking of first year cost only or the ongoing cost being the same. Consider budgeting for investment over time as changes will occur. Brian just mentioned the regulatory growth and change over time. You'll want to plan for that change with your EMIS solution as well. How are you going to conduct this needs assessment? Oftentimes, organizations don't have the in-house knowledge or the time to do this needs assessment and get through the process. So consider hiring a third-party consultant with an experienced business analyst. You can also conduct it in-house if you have the right resources, or even do a hybrid type approach. It's also important to go through and know all the common steps in the needs assessment process, which we'll cover next. And I say stay customer focused. So even applicable to your own organization, make sure that you're including all of your stakeholders, your users that need to use and adopt this system. Make sure that it satisfies their business need, because it's going to provide a better adoption and long-term sustainment going forward. So let's get into the needs assessment process. So this is two main areas, which is discovery phase and the review and documentation phase. So in the discovery phase, you have your planning project kickoff, so where you're reviewing the scope, you're talking about changes in the process, maybe something has been identified since you first proposed on this. You review the timeline, you talk about the initial key stakeholders and their roles. You also then begin to do phase two, preparing your information. So oftentimes here at EA, we create a data discovery checklist. And this is asking each stakeholder to provide us with some initial information about what it is they do with their data streams, how are they collecting their data, where are some efficiencies, how is the data stored, how is it reported, if it has a compliance regulatory aspect or not. Many of those things are included in the initial discovery checklist. Third, after we collect that initial data, we like to have a stakeholder engagement series. So this is where we're often conducting interviews with our stakeholders. They can be individual interviews, or they could be based on groups or divisions, like say there's a couple of stakeholders within a certain group that we want to reach out to. We review the information that they provided. We review and get demos of any existing system and processes. We're also making sure we identify where the efficiencies and issues are. So we're trying to replace or take care of those inefficiencies for them, so that we provide a better solution going forward. Now moving into the review and documentation phase. Step 4, we analyze. So we review all the data gathered. You start to document desired business goals and the functional requirements, and you identify follow-up questions. Step 5 is conducting a workshop. This is really useful to have everyone in the room together to be talking about the various needs of what this EMIS solution will entail. Sometimes people begin to speak up more when others also start to speak and say things that they need and realize things that weren't shared previously in the analyze phase. So it's really important to have this workshop together. After that, we begin to refine and document the functional requirements. You will likely need one-on-one calls to follow up and fill in the gaps from things that still need to be covered. And this is all, again, to document what is the needs of this EMIS solution. And then finally, the reporting phase to finalize your needs assessment report, what you want to get out of the EMIS solution, your business goals, and begin to analyze the software vendors. So now that you've established your needs assessment, you begin the software selection process. So research vendors that fit your top requirement priorities and share the budget if known, or ask them to share the cost of their software. Sometimes this is not always given up front, obviously, without knowing more of your needs, but it's important to try to ask for and get that information up front if you can. Do you need to hire a consultant? So again, this is often really important to do if you don't have the in-house expertise to hire someone to help lead you through this process and be an advocate for your team. Consider the benchmark with other organizations. What's their experience? Then start reaching out to those vendors and scheduling software demonstrations. So let the software vendors know your top business goals and functional priorities. This is not the time to withhold information. It's important to share as much information as you can and be very transparent. I often like to share a demo script with the vendors and make sure that that's provided. This is going to make you be able to compare more apples to apples across the vendors that you're interviewing with. And so it'll outline the key elements that you're expecting for someone to show you. Also record the sessions if you can to be able to, look back. There's a lot of information shared in these discussions, and you want to look back and see if there's something maybe that you missed there. Step 4, you document the benefits and challenges of all of the vendors that you discussed with. Try to narrow down to your top 2 or 3 choices for follow-up. Some of the follow-up and questions can include talking about honing in on the cost, their implementation process, the timeline, how they manage change. And really a lot of this too is all of these steps are very important, but also who did you get a good feel with? Who did you get a good vibe with, that you feel like is really going to be a partner with you, because that's what you want. Finally, you want to make a final selection and go into this as a partnership. So you've been through all of the steps to identify your needs and go through and interview the software selection. You don't want to have to repeat these steps a year or 2 from now. Work together and make sure that you're able to partner long term. So now that we've selected a vendor, how do you implement your solution? So let's talk about the implementation approaches first before we get into the process. So here are just some example approaches to software implementation. The waterfall method is a kind of an old school method used and adopted early on. It's linear, sequential in approach, and you don't start the next step until you finish the other one. So in the last 10 years, we've seen more adaptive and flexible models, such as the Agile and Scrum approach, where you can easily adapt to changing requirements and deliver incremental value to stakeholders sooner in the process. So you're not waiting to the very end to provide them with the solution. You can also work on a phased or hybrid approach, or as I like to call it here, rapid SaaS implementation. This is where, again, you may need an off-the-shelf with configurability, and there's no large development or enhancements that are needed. You really can configure these modules quickly, and we've implemented a lot of projects within 6 to 8 weeks with this approach. So what's the best approach for the client? Well, it's not one size fits all. It really depends on their organization, how many team members are involved, talking to the stakeholders and the roles, identifying all the pros and cons, and just talking about what's needed. Is there a critical module or function that's needed sooner? So let's get into the key components of the software implementation process. So regardless of the solution types that we covered or those approaches, most software implementations solutions require these implementation steps. While this diagram does show a linear approach, it doesn't have to be that way. I did that here for ease of showing and sharing the information. You can follow the Agile iterative approach for any one of these specific areas and modules to deploy. So some of the steps to include are initial review setup, discovery, requirements phase. So why am I saying that one again? Well, by the time that you've gone through your discovery and requirements and your needs assessment approach, and then you've now decided on a software vendor, things may have changed in your organization. Your requirements maybe have changed. So you do need to include this step to at least review those and make sure that you are documenting any change. System design configuration. then data migration, testing, training, and go live and support. So let's talk about each one of these. So with an implementation, with the initial setup and review, some common best practices is establishing the project framework. So really talking with your project manager or project team to establish some of the basic collaboration platform that you're going to use, change management process, talking about the key stakeholders and roles, implementation approach, many of the basic things to just really set up the project. Then you want to host the project kickoff meeting with all of the staff that are going to be involved in all of the stakeholders that are going to be involved in the project, reviewing the scope, the implementation approach, and general timeline. And you also want to give an opportunity during this to let the voice of the customer be heard on what they're looking for in, what is the main business goal of each person to improve and use an EMIS solution. Next is the discovery and requirements phase. So I briefly touched on this earlier. So you do need to revisit what those needs assessment requirements are that you documented. Has there been any change to them? Maybe there's another group incorporated that we need to think about. Maybe you've established a new business process workflow that needs improvement. So it's good to re-engage on that with the stakeholders. And then also reviewing existing system and files and documentation that we discussed. So here you'll refine your requirements, your needs, begin to create mock-ups where needed. So if you're not necessarily using an off-the-shelf SaaS solution and you're doing a custom development or a low-code platform, you may need to consider some of that system design mock-up documentation. Next is the system design development phase. So there's a lot of information covered in here, and depending on the approach, the solution type that is offered, you may not need all of these steps. So if you're going with a SaaS solution that already has the modules and information that you need, you won't be designing a database in the user interface. You won't really be developing any custom components. So you'll really just be configuring the existing solution and providing any integrations that you need and working through that configuration. Here is a good place where you can implement the agile approach and just kind of working through some of the other steps that we mentioned. So is there something, maybe there's a violation that happened recently with leaking tanks or inspections not being done for tanks. And so you need your inspection module mobile application a lot sooner than something else. So you can work through this iterative approach, deploy, train the folks on how to use that particular module and get them working in the solution sooner rather than later, then focus on the other components. It's important to always, throughout this process, host routine status calls, making sure you're engaging with the client, letting them know the status of things, and really also doing a show and tell, if you can, of what the system looks like. Next is data migration. This is a step that may not always be needed with your EMIS implementation. And it can also vary quite a bit when it comes to establishing what the implementation costs are. A lot of times you really do need to you need to consider what data needs to be migrated. So here is where you would conduct a data discovery. So again, your initial needs assessment helps in this area. What are you looking to migrate in the system? In my experience, it's really important to discuss what data you want to migrate, but also what is the purpose of it? What is the end use? I often hear clients say that, oh, we have to take all of our last 15 years worth of data from Excel or from whatever old system and put it in here. Okay, that's great, but what are you going to use it for? What are you going to query it? Do you need to do some trends or analytics? And that's fine if you do, but we want to make sure that we're covering those so we're not wasting time and money for no reason if that data is not going to be accessed more routinely. Develop a data migration plan, so identifying the source of the data and the format, describing that in use we talked about, And then finally, once you're in agreement of all that, actually conducting the migration, going through the exercise of mapping all the fields from the existing format to the new format, doing any data conversion, documenting issues. I haven't been through one data migration where there hasn't been an issue that you have to resolve with the client based on the data. You know, the data is not very maybe accurate or cleaned up, so you need to have those discussions to define what you're going to do with that data set. And then finally, you know, as you're going through the migration, you're documenting all of your findings and the information that's going to be summarized in data migration report. This is an important document just to keep with your EMIS solution that you've migrated to, and just making sure that all of your data was migrated appropriately in the way that you expected it to. Last few implementation items is testing. So while this is kind of what I think the 5th or 6th step, it's actually goes throughout the process. So you do internal testing throughout the project, especially if you're doing an agile scrum approach. You know, you're testing the modules and information that you're deploying to your customer as you're doing it. There's always a rigorous test before user acceptance testing. And then we get into, once the system or module or feature is available to the client, you want to conduct and create a user acceptance test plan. So this provides the client with access to the application to be able to use it firsthand and make sure that it's meeting their needs. It's really important step not to miss when implementing an EMIS solution. Oftentimes, this is where we find that a client maybe has left off an important enhancement or requirement that they actually needed as they're reviewing the data set. So those are things to be considered. Once you've conducted the testing with the client, you address the findings, obviously any defects or bugs, the software vendor is on the hook to fix. But then also there might be other agreed upon changes. Again, I just gave an example, the client saying that they need a feature that they didn't think about before, and it's really critical to their organization. So that may affect the timeline and budget for when you're going to get final implementation, but it's important to incorporate that in if it's needed. And then this is where you also begin to build a backlog of future enhancements that may be needed in your EMIS solution. So once you have everything developed, testing is complete, migration is done, you begin, you'll write up the training plan. So this provides information on what training is going to be conducted, what type of training material will be provided, who should attend each training session. And this is also where you talk to your client about the various training approaches. Again, we talked about on another slide about one size doesn't fit all. It's the same here with training. So you really need to meet your client where they're at and be flexible with the training approach. So they may want something in person for the administrators because that can be more intense training. And then for others that maybe just you need to use a portion of the system, an online or hybrid approach. Create or update training materials. So you may need to, if it's a customized solution, you may need to create user documentation, quick guides, playbooks, short video clips to help get them through that. Or in the case of an existing SaaS solution, just updating some of the training material that you already have that can be branded and specific to your client's business operations. And then once you have all that ready, you can execute the training per the plan. Setting up the user accounts and permissions, getting all of the training for admins and others going, and then also discussing the outlining ongoing support. So you want to make sure the folks that you're trained know that when they're using a brand new system that it's going to take time to adopt it. They need to know where to go for help. So identifying that and discussing that upfront is important. So lastly, you're ready to, after you've conducted all the training, you're ready to go live. So preparing and reviewing a readiness go live checklist is important for the implementation process. Discussing early on the go live schedule. And if you're cutting over from an existing software solution, making sure that all of the users know when they will stop using the current system or approach and need to start using this new one. So you kind of you review all of those readiness go live checklist steps with your client and appropriate stakeholders to make sure that they're ready to go live with the new solution. Once you're ready to go live, you communicate the schedule. Again, just communicate. You migrate over from your stage and test environments to production. You review the production to make sure it's ready for the users to use. And then you provide ongoing support. So once you go live with a solution, early on, you're talking about who's going to be maintaining this going forward. If it's a SaaS solution, it's the vendor providing the SaaS solution. And you need to, regardless of what it is, you need to schedule time in to meet routinely. So you want to check on the overall usage with the client, gives them a platform to talk to someone real time on issues that need to be addressed. There may be enhancements that someone brings up that you need to document and plan for in the future. But it's really important to make sure that you're feeling that you're discussing the ongoing support and meeting with the client to make sure that they are understanding and adopting the system. So with that covers the main implementation steps. And so I wanted to close out here with a few thoughts. First of all, I know that we covered a lot of material. So we went through the benefits of using an EMIS solution. We covered different solution types and project examples that EA has experience with, the needs assessment approach, software selection, and implementation. It's a lot of material to think about. So obviously you'll be able to review this if you need this information after the webinar here today. But if you heard nothing else today, just remember the first line. EMIS solutions are critical to your business operations. They really are. I love Excel just like anyone else does. Many of the EMIS platforms allow for you to use Excel and incorporate that with the solution, but you can't effectively manage critical environmental health and safety ESG data by using just an Excel platform to do so. Implementing an EMIS solution can be overwhelming. So it's, as we just covered, I mean, we quickly covered in 45, 50 minutes all of that information. There's a lot more to even discuss. Seek help from an experienced third-party consultant. Really, they're an extension to your organization, a trusted advisor who can really walk you through this process and represent you. Communication. It's important through our personal and work life, so it doesn't change here. Always be upfront and communicate the good, bad, and the ugly. Stakeholder engagement throughout is imperative. So you have to listen, whether you're doing this in-house organizations yourself or you're hiring a consultant to help support you. Listen well and document, repeat what you heard. Again, you want to make sure that you're understanding each stakeholder and user that's going to be using the system to make sure that they will benefit from it and be able to use it going forward. Requirement gathering and documentation, it's critical to gather that functional requirements. You can't start looking at software vendors without knowing truly what you need, or you'll go down a big rabbit hole and spend a lot of time and energy and come up with nothing. So you really need to start with what are my priorities and what are my functional requirements. And lastly, expect and plan for change. It's, again, part of everyday life. And so just expect that there will be change. Client resource commitment can change over time, establish a change management process, and also budget for that annual growth of change. So Brian, again, covered a lot of details about requirements and regulatory aspects changing over time. Well, you need your EMIS solution to grow with you as well. So with that, Amy, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thanks, Brian and Kara as well. That was a fabulous webinar. Now let's turn to Q&A. Open up the chat box. I don't see anything yet, but tell you what, I'll start off with a question. From an implementation perspective, which stage is where most organizations struggle the most?
Okay, thanks, Amy. So I guess I've been doing this for about 20 years, implementing different solution types for clients from a consulting perspective, but also from a pure software industry perspective. And the biggest struggle is the discovery requirements phase and or the needs assessment. So organizations struggle here because it's really an important step to document the business goals and to listen to all the stakeholders. Organizations can get overwhelmed with accomplishing this task, scheduling the calls, and really being non-biased about listening to what the needs are. So often when in organizations, someone may be telling you that they need something to improve, you're their manager and you're like, well, do you really need that? I mean, it's good to question some of those things, but also to be non-biased in that process to make sure their voices are heard too. So this is why often we see clients hiring folks like ourselves to kind of review this process and be their trusted advisor.
Jen, any other questions? Feel free to type them in the chat. Give you a minute. Okay. While we're waiting, I have one more question. So you had talked about 3 different types of software, I think low code, SaaS, and custom. Are there any other options available, and which do you see most commonly used?
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, there's actually quite a bit more. I just chose to focus on those 3 common ones. But another example is on-premise software. So this has been around for a long time, where you have offered, install, hosted, and maintained on the organization's site. An example of this is a Microsoft Office solution. Most software vendors in the EHS, ESG space has moved away from on-premise installs to more of a SaaS type solution offered in the cloud. Another example is freemium software. So I'm pretty sure everyone here has used freemium software, and that's where you get free software. They just kind of tease you, they give you just a few components to use. And then if you want better features, then you actually have to pay for the premium license to get that. So I would say the most, let's see, you said the most used. I guess the most used that I've seen in the last 10 years is a SaaS solution. So cloud-based, where it makes it easier for folks to quickly get implemented, scalable, flexible to the client's needs. And then certainly I can't leave out low-code solutions. So there's kind of been an explosion of low-code platform solutions in the last 5 years or so picking up.
Great. Thanks, Jen.
Sure.
I don't see any questions in the chat yet, but if anybody has any questions, please feel free to type them in, and we'll just give it a few minutes before we close out for the day. All right, well, with that, you want to switch to the last slide and we will close out. Again, thank you, Jennifer, Brian, and Kara for this amazing presentation. Oh, wait, got a question. How are the new EMIS systems handling the proliferation of citizen-generated data?
I mean, I guess one thing when I think about citizen-generated data, I mean, I think about public portals. So certainly we didn't really touch on it here, but EMIS solutions can support development of a public portal for ease of sharing data with citizens and also consuming data. So allowing folks to upload and share some of their own information. So there is also the ability to incorporate those type of public portals with an EMIS solution. Anything else to add, Brian, from your standpoint, or Kara?
I can't really add anything to that. Like I said, that's a great question.
Great, everyone. Well, with that, we will close out for the day as we are reaching the top of the hour. Thank you all and have a great day.
Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks, everyone.